So, sponsored brands. Andrew's already talked a lot about campaign naming and campaign structure. And for all of our campaigns, all of that's going to be relevant. But with sponsored brands, things are a little bit more interesting because we're not necessarily we don't have products that we add to ad groups, right? With sponsored products, when he was showing you the multi-product ad groups versus single product ad groups, when it comes to sponsored brands, we don't have that. We don't add individual products. We do with sponsored display and sponsored products. With sponsored brands, we have creatives. So we're going to be using the single creative ad groups. We can call it SCAGs with a C if you want an abbreviation. We don't. We don't talk about it enough for us to feel the need for a categorization or an abbreviation, I should say. But the main thing is the campaign itself. There's a few ways in which we can group these, but keep in mind everything that we're saying is we're showing you kind of some good default best practices that we use that seem to work well in most situations. But it's certainly not a one-size-fits-all approach with any of these items. So you definitely want to take everything, tweak it to a way that fits for yourself. But usually we're going to be grouping our campaigns by a product or a product category. So, or a group of products. So I'll just put category here. But you can think about it if, imagine you're selling iPhone cases or you sell iPhone accessories, iPhone everything, right? You sell chargers, cases. You might want to put in one of your categories. You're going to say, okay, this is going to be specifically our iPhone cases. And so you're only going to be featuring those products there. It's not going to be a good idea if you just have iPhone accessories between chargers, screen protectors, and cases to put all of those into a single campaign, and especially not in the same creative. And when people are typing in iPhone and you're just going after, iPhone chargers or whatever, you got iPhone phrase match, going after chargers, cases, screen protectors, and you got all your products lumped in there. That's not going to be good. We definitely want to be a little bit more dialed into what we're promoting and to who we're promoting it. But you'll usually group it by category. And then when we get into which is just going to be a small group of products that are all will fit well together within the same ad, going after a limited number of terms. And then we're going to get to the ad group. But before we really do that, we're going to talk about the variables that could go into the creative. So let's actually come down here, and I'll change markers really quickly just for fun. If we are considering the variables that go into the creative, there's a few items that we have the ability to change. We can have the headline, which is basically just going to be your text. And I'm going to put in here CTA, that call to action, because that's going to be a very important element. We're going to have our main featured image or a video if you're doing sponsored display videos. But I'll just put in here the image, and we're mainly kind of talking about that featured image, not necessarily the main images of your products, because down here we're going to actually be including the ASIN group or the ASIN selection. So we'll make that plural because you can have up to 3. And of course, there are quite a few different sponsored brand types. You can do the storefront, you can do the product collection, you can do sponsored brand videos. For this, we're mostly talking about the product collection where you can choose up to those 3 ASINs to promote, because those typically perform the best in all of our experimentation. Between the storefronts don't seem to do that well. It's not that they never do well, but product collection seems to do the best. So we're kind of narrowing the focus of this conversation down to where most people are going to be putting the majority of their budget. So these are going to be the main variables that we are testing, optimizing, trying to see which one works. And it's also very important to note that as we're testing these, you only want to be testing one at a time, right? If we're really trying to see which creative performed the best, we don't want to just have, let's say we have 2 creatives, and for our iPhones, one of them says, we're testing maybe a couple of different calls to action. Those calls to action, if you don't know, those are just action verbs like shop now, discover, check out, whatever. So maybe we're saying check out our iPhone cases in one headline. Another one says discover durable iPhone cases. And then we're also trying out different featured images. And then we're also throwing in different ASINs from our different product selections. If we're testing all 3 of these things and changing all 3 of these variables all at once, and we're trying to compare the 2 creatives, we're not necessarily going to know if one did better than the other. Which element was it that was driving the better performance? Was it simply the image, or was it simply the call to action we were using? So we only want to be testing one at a time. But these are going to be elements that we want to include in our ad group name. And so the way in which we're going to essentially do that is I like to typically put the headline up front in my ad group names so I can just see, because I really like testing headlines. We might have to do another lesson or a podcast episode where we talk more about copywriting and what really goes into making an effective headline that's eye-catching, engaging, and drives good performance for this ad type. But typically what I'll do is I'll put it in quotes, whatever my headline is. And so, or maybe I'm just testing, I abbreviate it, right? I don't want to need the whole entire headline in there, but if one of my headlines is more emphasizing the durability of the product, and another headline is more trying to emphasize the fun designs of my cases, I'll just put that in there as a note to myself of what I'm doing. Maybe in this case, I am curious to see how the call to action discover works. And then I'm comparing that to my shop now. And so these would be two separate ad group names, but I'm not done naming these just yet. We'll then use a divider. Now, I like to use these vertical separators in my ad group names. I know Andrew likes to use underscores. Andrew's method of naming, I will admit, is probably better, less likely to break on the back ends of coding systems when they can't properly understand spaces within. So he uses underscores, but I much more like something that's more visually appealing on the front end. So I'll usually go like this. And then the image, maybe we're testing a couple images. And so you want to include another note here in the name that's going to really help you just quickly understand what image it was. So maybe for your iPhone cases, one of them was a close-up, like a close angle. So we'll just say, this is our close-up shot that we're testing. Close up. And maybe this is our wide angle. So we have a couple different shots that we're testing out, a couple different featured images, and then we'll break these down into then mentioning the three ASINs that we're including. So we'll have ASIN 1, so it'll be like, B0 ... and then I just do a space, and then B0 ... and then throw in the third one, and the same one here, but I won't bother writing it because it's going to block my face out. Now, in this case, I think I'm actually kind of just doing the example that I said not to do, where we don't want to be testing each, changing each variable across the different ad groups. But what we do, what we would want to do is perhaps in this case, this is actually still just a close-up. So let me actually just clean that up really quickly, and we'll pretend we're not doing it. If you had 3 ad groups going, then it would have worked sufficiently, because what I could have done, and actually maybe I will just write it down here, but we have our close-up once again, with our ASINs are here. And then maybe we'll do one more where we're going to test discover. And this one is our wide shot. And then ASINs. So now we're properly testing. We can see if this one ends up being the best performer. We can then say, okay, is this creative the best performer because we were testing the keyword discover, or because we were doing the close-up? Well, if it's better than this ad group, if this one up here outperforms this ad group, and they were both the close-up and they both had the same ASINs, we know that it was actually the call to action discover, which was outperforming the shop now call to action. So we have some exclusivity where we know this outperformed this, and the only thing we changed was using the keyword discover, or the call to action discover. And then if we're comparing this same sponsored brand creative to this ad group, and this one also was using the call to action discover and had the same ASINs, but the only thing that changed was the actual featured image, whether we were using that close-up versus a wide angle, we now know that both the call to action discover and the close-up featured image were the reasons why it was performing better. Now, we say that part of the reason why we prefer to put these items in these individual ad groups is for the testing, and the way in which that's also going to work, because the other thing we have to compare is when you're looking at this, and this performed extremely well, double check the keywords that were driving the sales on that one, and if these ones didn't perform well, double check which keywords were driving the spend. It could have been the case that this one just happened to get a lot more clicks on a high-performing keyword, and these ones got more clicks on worse-performing keywords. So that'll just be something else to keep in mind. Some people like to also limit these down to only having one keyword per ad group, but we're not a big fan of that, especially because it will significantly limit the amount of volume that you're getting on these and not necessarily give you fast enough data generation to pull out some quick insights around which creative is doing the best and all of that. So that'll just be something to keep in mind, though. And another reason why we said it's important to do these single creative ad group structures is because we were saying that if we were to group all of these into one ad group, and you can name the creatives accordingly, like Amazon will let you add multiple creatives to an ad group, you could still name these creatives that way. In fact, we typically do. How we name our creatives is typically the same way in which we name our ad groups. We name them in the same because there's only one creative in ad group in each ad group. But let's just say hypothetically, all of this, instead of being 3 separate ad groups with 3 separate creatives, let's just say all of these were in one single ad group. Now, if that were the case, then we might still see some performance difference between, which creative is outperforming another creative, but we would not be able to see if the difference in performance was because of which keywords were going to which creative, or if it was just the creative itself was doing better. So if all of these, let's just say all of these were bidding on iPhone cases, iPhone accessories, and iPhone chargers. If all 3 of these were in the same ad group and they're all bidding on those same keywords, and this top one did extremely well, and we also saw that the iPhone cases was driving the most sales, we don't know if this creative itself was the one that was driving all the sales, or if those sales for that keyword were split up across the different creatives and which ones were driving the spend. We can't make that correlation between which creative is working the best with each keyword. We don't have that one-to-one pairing. As soon as we separate them into separate ad groups, we now have that information. So we can identify whether or not it was just the keywords that was changing the performance between these creatives, or if it was in fact the creative itself and the quality of that creative. Now, another reason that we mentioned is that if they're in the same ad group, sometimes we'll see that Amazon will just give all of the impressions maybe to this middle one. And maybe it's not even the best performer. You're kind of wondering, come on, Amazon, this one has the best click-through rates. This one has the best conversion rates. Why are you only giving it 10% of the impressions? Why don't you give it more impressions? And if you separate them out into separate ad groups, we'll see that we have an easier time getting a more even spread across performance for each creative. Now, it's not always the case, especially if they're all bidding on the same keywords. There is still some of that keyword cannibalization going. So if all of them are bidding on iPhone cases, only one sponsored brand ad is possible to be, there's only one top of search sponsored brand placement for iPhone cases. So only one of these is going to win that impression. So it does help having them in separate ad groups to more evenly distribute impressions, as Amazon kind of does a little bit more testing, but it's still not perfect. However, we do find that's a little easier to just pause these ad groups if we really want to make sure, Shop Now just hasn't gotten enough clicks, traffic on that keyword for iPhone cases, and we just want to push a little more spend there. We can to get more data. We can easily just pause the other ad groups, maybe raise the bid a little bit on this one for iPhone cases to start, forcing some more traffic here, so we can see actually how this creator is going to perform for iPhone cases. So that's why separating these out into separate ad groups is going to work extremely well. It gives us that extra level of control of saying, you know what, I want to test Shop Now because Amazon's not giving it a chance yet. I'm going to take these controls back from Amazon because of the way I set up my campaign structure. I have that ability to take these controls away from Amazon and push this lever myself and put the traffic where I want it to go so that I can actually see which creative is performing the best. Then you can take these insights and moving forward, when you're launching more sponsored brand ads, you have really solid data around, you know what, people really like the close-up shots, or people really like the wide shots, or people really like the lifestyle images versus the featured products styles versus, if you're selling outdoorsy equipment, do people like seeing maybe you're selling those rock climbing shoes, and do people like seeing rock climbing shoes on a person, or do people like seeing the rock climbing shoes just laying out, scattered across a bunch of rocks, like perched up, posed on rocks some way, So you can be testing those to see which one's driving a better click-through rate, which one's driving a better conversion rate, which one's getting me better ACoS, depending on your campaign goals. Are you trying to drive consideration primarily, or are you primarily trying to drive sales? All of this is going to be possible if you follow these structures. And also, from what I've seen, most people aren't actually actively testing their sponsored brand creatives and really frequently trying to see which one's performing the best. And this is going to give you a huge edge against the competition, especially as these sponsored brands only become more and more competitive. The CPCs on these we've seen just skyrocketing. And this is a great way because remember, those CPCs, they're partially determined by how much you're willing to bid and how much everyone else is willing to bid. But a part of that is actually just Amazon's their ad quality score that they assign to you. And if you have a really highly relevant product or a really highly relevant ad, you will see slight CPC discounts for these really competitive keywords. So if you can really dial in your creatives and get them tailored extremely well so that you have high performing, high click-through rate, high conversion rate creatives, you'll actually see that Amazon will start awarding you more impressions so you can get even more traffic, and also award you a slightly lower CPC, which just improves your margins on those ads even more. So as all the CPCs are climbing, everyone's getting kind of, dwarfing each other and not really being able to get impressions on these high volume keywords without paying an arm and a leg for a click. You're going to be the one who's testing, optimizing to essentially get on Amazon's good side, right? They have their own algorithms that are deciding when there's something that's really high quality. They think it's also a good customer shopper experience, right? Because Amazon, as they're placing ads all over their site, they want to make sure that they're also providing as best of a shopper experience for their customers as they can. And so they want to pick the best performing ads to make a good shopping experience. And so if your ad, after testing, optimizing, tweaking, you've realized the secret formula to what's going to be the best performer, you're now on Amazon's good side, you're on the customers, the shoppers' good side, and you're winning all around. So this is a winning strategy for sponsored brands. And we have one more lesson on this where we'll talk about a slightly more advanced tactic that we can employ here, which is, it's a form of a single keyword campaign, but it's more specifically a single keyword theme campaign. That's more how I like to call it. But essentially all we're going to be doing is we're going to be taking these headlines and tailoring them towards specific keywords that we know we want to win on. And part of what the goal is there is to improve our ad quality score by making sure we include the keywords or the keyword theme in our headline. So in the example of iPhone cases, maybe we're just taking iPhone case phrase, and that's the main thing we just want to go after. Anyone who's typing an iPhone case, we have that keyword in our headline, and we're saying discover iPhone cases, shop now iPhone cases, and just really, really hammering it. I will say though, I think I forgot to mention this earlier, always make sure to include that CTA. You can test your ads with the CTA versus without, but from our experience, we've already done a lot of testing, and it's always better when you have that action verb. So don't just say iPhone cases from iPhone Pros. Say discover iPhone cases from iPhone Pros. And the word discover, by the way, Amazon uses that in all of their marketing materials, so I figured it must be good. And it seems to be doing well for us. But yeah, you could say explore, discover, or maybe you're just saying improve. You want to be telling a story. So maybe we should have a lesson more on copywriting and how to really best optimize that. But for now, hopefully this is helpful for giving you some direction with how to get the best performance out of your sponsored brand ads by utilizing the single creative ad group strategy. All right, we'll see you on the next one.